Hello everyone and welcome to Geotab online training. This is Carrie Carter. Thank you for joining us for Tuesday's talk today. And today's talk is on reporting and customization. And Angie is going to walk us through all of those great things about reporting and getting into some customization. We will be running an advanced class in the new year, in January hopefully. So please join us for that as well. And with that, Ange, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Carrie. So hello, everybody, and welcome to today's session. So as Carrie mentioned, I'm going to be going over reporting, the basics of reporting, and how to customize your own report, and not only how to customize it, but also how to import it into the database, throw it up on a dashboard, and then I'll even show you how you can edit that existing custom report as well. So I'm just going to start off with just a quick little outline. So I'm just going to show you a couple of sample dashboards, some stuff that I've made before, just some simple stuff to give you an idea of what can be done with the system. Then I'll explain how the actual reporting works within my Geotab. And then, like I said, we're going to go through creating a template, and then we'll just go over some best practices and little tips and tricks from myself. So here's some sample dashboards here, and you can see I've actually kind of given them a little bit of a category. You know, we all know that Geotab has our 5 pillars, and what I like to do is when we think about custom reports and what a customer really needs is what pillar do they really fall into. I always recommend for resellers out there, even customers, if you've got, you know, a need, a safety need, here's your safety type of reports. You know, maybe the need is more fuel and ROI based. Okay, well here's your fuel and ROI based type of reports. So you can always kind of have those custom reports saved on your system that you can just import into your database at any time. More so for the resellers, so that you can very quickly set up your customer databases. So as I mentioned, you know, what are the fleet's needs, right? So we've got safety, productivity, fuel, ROI, and, you know, we've got many more that you can kind of fall those into, more categories you can fall into, like compliance, right? It's always good to understand what those needs are so that you can gear your dashboards and your reporting towards those needs, because going into a system and just throwing in some dashboards and hoping that it looks good and that it makes sense may not be necessarily what the fleet's actually asking for or what they really need to use in the system. Now, some fleets may not necessarily know what they really need the system for, and you can then, you know, throw in maybe 1 or 2 from each category, and then you can really take a look at their baseline data and customize from there. So when talking about dashboards, I really recommend that they should just be quick snapshots of data. So it's something that whoever is viewing the dashboard should, when they log in, it should be something that they can see and they know that they have to take action from it. So, you know, usually, you know, top 5 or 10, or your bottom 5 or 10, you know, who your best or worst, or even maybe for the fleet manager, breaking it down by regions or divisions to really see how the entire fleet's doing and maybe compare towards each other. And then even some trending data. So when I speak of trending data, I mean, like, you know, if you want to run a report for the last 3 months and I want to view the data month over month, you know, really get an idea of how my fleet's not only doing this week, but maybe even year to date or quarterly. In talking about how the Geotab reports work, this section here is really telling you what's in those custom reports. But what I'm going to do is I'm just actually going to pop out of here. I'm going to go into a database that I have open here. And this is just our demo database. And you can see I've got some sample dashboards here as well, some additional ones from what the ones that you actually just saw. And you can see that we do have that trending that I was speaking of. So I've got a quarterly report, and these 3 actually kind of speak to each other, if you will. You know, you've got your last 3-month fuel trend, idle trend, and mileage trend. They should all be kind of going in the same direction. So essentially every area of the software is a report and can be exported into Excel or PDF, which is pretty fantastic. So, you know, everything from your map, your trips history, even the summarized information, all the way to your exception data, all of that information can be exported into Excel, and we all know with Excel you can do great things with it. You can customize how you want the data to look. You can throw in some really great formulas and functions, and really play around and really make the report custom to what you are looking for. In saying that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run through creating a template, and when I open up the report, I'll explain to you what the different tabs mean and how they kind of all relate to each other. So the template that I'm going to make is just a top 5 idling for last week. Make it nice and simple, nothing too complicated with this one. And there's a couple of areas in the software that you can actually get idle information. And not every report will be the best one to use. So what I mean by that is you can get your idle duration from a trips history report, and that's a really detailed report. So that's going to give you one line for each trip that the vehicle drove, and if you're running it for your entire fleet, that could end up being a pretty big report. And if the end goal is really just wanting to know your top 5 idlers, there's better reports that you can use that are more efficient and less data heavy, if you will, such as a trip summary. So trip summary just summarizes all that information for you. It doesn't give you that detailed location information, which you don't really need with a top 5 report. There's also risk management, which can give you the summarized information as well, but it'll give you a lot of other pieces in there too. So you really want to kind of think about not only what you want to do with the report, but maybe what you want to do with the report down the road. You know, maybe you don't want it just to be top 5 idling, you want to add some other piece of data into there, maybe an exception report. Okay, well, if you're thinking about that down the road, probably want to build it from a risk management report, because the risk management report includes exception information. It's a little bit more advanced, you know, in knowing every single piece of data that's in every single report, and you'll get to learn that as you go. But just a couple of little tips there on really, if you want a summarized report, just use the summarized base report to build it from. So in saying that, I am going to go into our map. I'm going to go to trips history, and straight from there I can actually just click on summary. So what this is giving me is a summarized view of all of the vehicles, and I did actually already run it for last week. So you can see when I go into my options, I can choose daily, weekly, monthly, and I can even do some custom dates and times as well. And you can see we've got our trending information, which we call the sub-periods. So if I actually wanted it to be last week and I wanted the sub-periods to be on by day, what that would do essentially is it would give me daily information for last week instead of just one line for the whole week. For this particular report, I'm just going to keep it at pretty simple, and we're just going to look at last week overall and just keep it like that. Now, you'll notice that I'm actually going into the trip summary section itself. I really recommend when you're creating a custom report to, instead of using the templates that we have built into the system, to actually run a live report, if you will, that has real data in it. And the reason why I recommend that is it'll actually allow for you to see what the report is going to look like when you actually do go and run it with real data. Because with the template information, you really only have 2 vehicles in there, and it's template information. It's not real data. So you may find that if you build it from one of those, that you could actually spend a lot of time editing it afterwards because, oh, I didn't think about that. Oh shoot, no, it doesn't look the way I wanted it to. So I always try and think 10 steps ahead when I'm making these reports and really where I want it to go and how I want it to look at the end result, and you have to kind of really take a couple of things into consideration. Well, what if there's only one vehicle, or what if, you know, they're only belonging to this particular group? So try and just step outside of the box, if you will, and think about the what-if scenarios when you're building these reports. So that's why I say let's build it from live data. Then we've pretty much got all those what-if scenarios in there, and we can work with them the first time, and that's pretty much the only time you're going to need to touch that report. Okay, so we're looking at a graphical view, but what I want to do is download the Excel file. So if I click on View, you can see this particular database, we've got a whole bunch of custom reports, but if this were a new database, we'd really just be looking at List, Report, and Advanced. Now, the difference between these is list is the current one that's selected, and that's really the graphical view that you can see right now. Report will give me the Excel report, and advanced will give me the Excel report as well. Now, both of those reports actually have the exact same data set in them. They just look a little bit different. I prefer to use the advanced report, and I'll explain why when I open it, and you'll get an idea of why you would choose this, and you'll probably want to do that as well. So I'm just going to click on advanced, and it's actually running in the back end, and it's just giving me a little snapshot view of the report. And you can see the advanced, there's lots of information in there, and I can even actually scroll over, and it's pretty compact and small and hard to read. Now I can zoom in if I want to, but really what I want to do with this report is I want to export it, and I want to start playing around with it and editing it. So you can see I actually have the option to download this report as a PDF or an Excel file. So usually the PDF would be for when you've actually created your custom report and the customer can download as a PDF. So I'm going to click on the Excel button. I'm going to save this in my custom reports folder. I always recommend to have a folder, either a shared folder within your organization or just for yourself, for all of the custom reports that you make, because there could be times, and this is more so geared towards resellers out there, there could be times that you make a report that actually might make sense for some of your other customers out there, and now you have your own little repository to pull from. So I'm going to save this as, I'm just going to call it Top 5 Idling. Now I did already have one in there, but I'm just going to ignore that one. I'm going to save over it. And I'm going to download it here. Now some browsers you may not actually have the option set up for you to choose where you want to save it. It may just download into your downloads folder, so just make sure you remember where you have it saved. Now, off the bat, you can see that I've got a yellow bar along the top here. Nothing really to be concerned about with this one. If you read it, it makes perfect sense. It's just saying for you to be careful because this file was downloaded from a website and it could contain viruses. Now, obviously, Geotab, we would never put viruses in any of these reports, but Excel's just throwing some cautions there. So you can go ahead and just click on Enable Editing. What this will do is allow you to actually edit the report. While this is loading, I don't know if there's any questions out there yet on what I've kind of covered.
Angie, there's one here that talks about when you define a custom time period, does it allow you to define the time as well or just the date? So you can do date and time or just the date?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. So when you're doing the custom, you can actually drill down into the time as well. Sorry, for the trip summary, it's just the dates. It depends on the report. Trip summary just gives you the dates because really it's a summarized information for the whole day. You don't really want to, you don't usually typically drill down in this report. But if I were to go back to the details, and go to options, choose custom, you can see that I have the time included there. So we really give you the option for the time in the details because it is a detailed report. An exception that was broken and you don't really want to look at all of the trips for the day, you want to drill down into that particular time, you can definitely do that. Now the time is actually more so when you're talking about running a manual report. When you're scheduling it as an emailed report or a dashboard report, time doesn't really make too much sense because you're usually going to run it for yesterday or last week, and narrowing it down to time, not feasible. Hope that makes sense. If not, please let me know. Any other questions? And forgive me, my Excel is giving me some problems. I'm just going to shut it down and open it back up again.
Okay, I do have a question that's come up here. I think I can answer this just while Angie's getting sorted out. There's a question about the drop-down list where it says list, report, and advanced. The list is truly just a list. It's showing you whatever is on the screen when you first come into the report. It shows as the list. And then from there you have the choices of report or advanced. Both report and advanced are the same data in the report, but they do show up a little differently. The report tends to have a little bit more basic information, whereas advanced will pull more of that and show you a whole bunch more detail. Both of them have the same amount of data so that they can be pulled the same way, but they only show you a little bit differently.
Perfect timing, because I just got my Excel back up and running again, and that's a good segue because that's exactly what I wanted to explain. So I'm actually looking at, this is the advanced one that I downloaded, remember? What I want to show you is the data tab. So you can see at the bottom I've got, right now I'm currently on the report tab is what we call it, and I do also have a summary tab. But if I right click on either one of those and I click on unhide, you can see we have a data tab. Now I'll explain the languages one in a second. That's actually a new feature we've come up with, but for now I'm just going to unhide the data tab. So the data tab, not very pretty, not meant to be. That's why we always keep it hidden. So anytime you run a report, the data tab is always hidden, and the reason for that is this is where all the raw data is fed. So you can see the column headers don't necessarily make too much sense. I'll just make this a little bit bigger. You know, trip summary, period number, trip summary, customer duration, and it keeps going and going and going. So the report from that list and the advanced report both have the exact same information on the data tab. So nothing is different as far as that goes. The difference really lies in the report tab. So the report tab on the advanced report is actually everything that we see on the data tab. And basically what this report tab is doing is it's referencing that data tab. So let me just make this a little bit bigger here. So you can see I've got group, and if I double click on there, you can see that it's saying data B9. So really that's saying it's grabbing the information from cell B9 on the data tab. And that's what every one of these is doing as it goes through. So E9, F9, and so forth. And the reason we do this is because it allows for us to pick and choose what we want included in the view that the customer is going to see. We can't really edit anything on the data tab. If we were trying to change a name of one of these headers, then that would essentially break the report, because those header names are almost like if you were thinking of from a development standpoint, these are almost like the API calls to grab the data from the database. And if the name of those changes, then the Geotab software doesn't know what the report is trying to grab. And so we don't recommend to make any changes as far as that goes to the data tab, which is why we've created this report tab. It's the same information, you're grabbing it from the data tab, but I can now delete columns if I don't really want them. I can insert new ones, and I can do some sums or averages and all these different formulas in there and really start to manipulate the data. I hope that answers the question. I can even download the standard report just to show you what that means, and I don't have to necessarily download it. I can just show you in the software. So once again, this is the list view. So this is the graphical view that we see here. And if I click on the report view, it's going to give me that snapshot, and you can see it's actually giving me the summary page. So the summary is actually a pivot table, and that's the information that it's giving me. And so in this particular case, the report is actually, the report and the data tab are hidden by default, and only the summary is visible. So that's all that we see when we run it within the Geotab system and download it as well. Whereas the advanced one gives us all of everything, which really allows for us to customize it without taking too many steps. All right, so I've called this the top 5 idling report. So that's basically what we're going to do. Before I make any sort of changes to the data itself, I want to explain that summary tab, which I just kind of lightly touched on there. Just going to expand this a little bit bigger. So every single report within the Geotab system, when you download the report, it's going to have those 3 tabs: data, report, and summary. Summary is basically referencing that report tab, but it's a pivot table. And some people may not be too familiar with pivot tables, or they are, and it's kind of frightening, but it really shouldn't be. It's not something to be kind of concerned with. It's actually pretty easy to work with. So you can see when I click on the pivot table itself, it gives me this field box here. And this is the more intimidating part, I think, for most people. Really all it's doing is it's just, these are all of the headers of the columns that I see on the report tab. You can see them here, name, period end date, customer duration. And it's allowing for me to run a table only on select ones. So I've only got certain ones selected here, and from here I can create a chart on specific data. I can summarize things in a different way than I can't really do in the report tab. This allows for more manipulation of the data. We'll play around with this one and we get to the end of the template. We can really see how we can make the chart. Okay, so on the report tab here, there's a few things that I don't really care about in this report because I really just want to look at idling information. Now these three columns here that we see, the period, number of period start date and period end date, these are meant for more when you're running one of those trended reports. So it'll give you, let's say if it was last week in daily, it would give me period number 1 for the first day of the week, and it would give me all those aligned for every vehicle, and then it would do it again for the second day of the week, and then again for the third and the fourth and so forth. And the period start date will be that date of the week, and the end date will be the last day of the week. Now for this particular report, I only ran it for last week and I didn't turn any trending information on, and when I run the report or publish it on the dashboard, I'm not going to be concerned about trending information either. So I know that I don't really need this to clutter up the report tab for the customer's view. It's still going to be there on the data tab, so no need to worry about that. You can always pull it back in if you want to, but I'm just going to go ahead and I'm actually going to delete the columns, and that's okay to do in the report tab because we're just referencing that data tab. So I'm just highlighting those columns and I'm going to right click and I'm going to delete them. You want to be careful that you actually delete them, don't clear the contents. Clearing the contents will just basically just clear the contents of that column. The column still exists. So what I want to do is I want to actually delete the columns. Okay. And there we go. All these other pieces here, I don't really need them either. I really just want the idling information. I could keep the driving information just for the sake of having something else for them to kind of reference. But the customer and non-customer duration, this is really the stop time at different zone types. Not really needed for this particular report. So I'm going to delete those columns as well. And then these ones here. We also include the percentage, so you can even see the percentage of time that they were at one of those zones or driving or even idling as well. For this one, don't need them. Okay, and then I've actually got max speed in here, which is pretty cool. Don't need that for this one, but at least we know it's there, so that if you ever want to use that in a report, you know where to find it now. So I think these are pretty good pieces to keep in there. I've got the name of the vehicle, the group that it belongs to, what their overall drive time was, their overall distance driven, and their overall idle duration. Pretty good pieces of information to look at, so to give them a little bit more detail. Now I'm going to go over to the Summary tab, and we're going to use the table to give us that top 5 information, because this report actually has 6 vehicles in there and I only want it to show the top 5. So you can see when I go over to the Summary tab, it's actually still showing all of that information that I just deleted. And one thing I want to point out, when you're working with a pivot table, you have to refresh the pivot table for it to actually grab the new data that you've either put in or taken out. There is a setting within the pivot table itself, and I'll go through that when I'm actually going through the options, and that is to refresh the pivot table every time the report opens, and that's a key piece. There's a lot of times where somebody has a report on their dashboard and it's maybe a daily report, and every day it's the same information. They're like, why isn't it changing? And that's because that one particular refresh option isn't selected, and so it's still holding on to old information. The new information is always going to be there in the report, the data tab, but the summary doesn't know. It's not smart enough to know that there's new information. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to right-click on this pivot table, and I'm going to click on Refresh, and you'll see that I now have a limited list to choose from over here and over there. Perfect. So really all I want to see is top 5 idling. So I don't care about the group in this particular report, and I don't care about the driving duration or the distance. I just want that idle time. Now you can see what's happened is the dates up here have just turned into those hashtags there. What's happening here is there's a default setting in the pivot table to auto-fit based on the data that's in it. So if we get vehicles with longer names, it will auto-expand the column, or it will shrink if they're shorter names. So it just did that with the idle duration, and what that does is it shrinks the entire column, so anything outside of the pivot table is shrunken as well. And dates don't like it when that happens. It doesn't show you the date, it just shows you what we see here. So I'm just going to expand this column so that I can actually still see the date now. And I'm going to right-click on the pivot table, and I'm going to go to the pivot table options. So it's this option here on the front of the pivot table options called AutoFit Column Width on Update. So on update or on refresh. So you can see when I refresh, it'll actually shrink it again because I have this checked. So I'll just show you what I mean. So if I go back over here, right-click and refresh again, it shrinks it back up again because it's auto-fitting based on the contents inside that pivot table. So if I just expand that again and I go back into my options, I'm going to take that option off, click OK, and if I right-click my pivot table again and go to refresh, it doesn't do anything. It stays the same. It's static now. It's not going to change based on the data inside of it. Now, before I move forward, the one thing that I forgot to mention is basically how this pivot table is grabbing the data. So I apologize for that. So if it's not clear, what it's doing is it's grabbing the information from the report tab, which we saw because I deleted a whole bunch of columns, and it's reflected over here. But let me go back over to the report tab. There's something that we've built into these reports, and it's a named range, and it's called all data. And basically what it does, and you can see, I don't know if you can see my mouse over here just above column A, it's telling me the current cell that I have clicked or selected, which is E4. There's a little drop down, and you can see I have the option for all data, which is that named range that I just mentioned. So if I click on all data, it's just showing me what all data is encompassing, and it's everything in the report from row 8 down. And this will actually grow and shrink based on the data when the report is run. So if we run the report in a new database that has hundreds of vehicles, the all data named range will grow with that, and it will always grab all of the data. And that's why we've called it that. Now, if you're manipulating a report, and let's say you want to know, I don't know, I'm going to just throw something out there, date created, whatever. And I'm just going to say equals the created date, and I'm going to hit F4 and make sure I just get that it doesn't grow with it. If I fill that down, I've got my date created. You can see that the font and everything looks a little bit different. And if I go over into the Summary tab and I right-click and refresh, I don't have that new column as an option to choose from. And the reason is because of that all data named range. The Summary pivot table is created from the all data named range. So if I were to go back to this drop down and click on all data, you can see it's not highlighting that column. I'd have to actually edit the named range to include that, or I can actually take that column, let me just delete it, and I can actually insert something inside of the named range, inside of all of those columns that we already have in the named range. And I can do this again. Date created, and I'm going to say equals cell B3, and I'm going to make that static, so it's always going to equal cell B3, and I'm just going to fill it down. I now have it within my all data named range, and I can verify that by clicking on my all data, and you can see it's now encompassing because I created that inside of the named range. If I go over to the summary and I right-click and refresh, I now see date created as an option to build my table from. Now I don't actually want that in there, so I'm just going to delete it, but it was just for the sake of showing you. If I refresh again, it's now gone. Fantastic. Okay, so from here I've got my table. I know that I want top 5. So right now I think I've got 7 vehicles. So the question now comes, do I want top 5 or bottom 5? Do I want it to be, do I want to look at the worst or the best? When it comes to idling, probably the worst, because I want to know where I need to make some changes. Not saying that you should always pick on the ones that are having the problems, but it's up to the fleet. You can do top or bottom. So to do that, I'm going to click on the drop down for the name, and I'm going to go to value filters. So what this is doing is, when you can see we have label filters and value filters. So the value filters is I want to be able to filter or sort or get my top 10 based on the value, which is the idle duration. Okay, so if I go to value filters, and at the bottom here I've got top 10 as an option. It's going to open up this little window here, and I can choose my top or bottom, and I can choose my number. I can use these arrows, or I can actually just click in here and type 5. Okay, so it's saying, do I want to buy items, percent, or sum? I'm going to keep it at items. And do I want to do my top by idle duration? If I had more values, then it would give me options, but because I just have idle duration, that's all I have to choose from. So I want to know the top 5 vehicles that have the highest idle duration. So when I click OK, it's going to limit this list. It's going to take 2 vehicles out, and it's going to give me just 5. And there we go. So now I've got 5, and I've got only the ones that had the highest duration. So if I clear the filter, I can show you the ones that were taken away. So you can see this one has the smallest idle duration, and this one would be the next one up. So that's the one that says van and Carnival. So I can actually go through and show you again. Value filters, top 10, change it to 5, and I'm just going to click on OK because everything else looks good. And you can see I no longer see van and Carnival in that list. Perfect. Now we're getting places. So now I want to make this a report that's going to be put on the dashboard. So I want to create a chart. Easiest way to create a chart, and I do have the newest version of Excel, so it might be slightly different from you guys, but it's not too different, which is good. I'm just going to click on anywhere on the pivot table. It doesn't really matter as long as I'm on the data. If I'm away from it, you can see that field list goes away. I want to make sure I can see that field list while I'm doing this. So I'm going to go up to my ribbon here, and I'm going to click on Insert. And I think I'm just going to do just a regular column chart. Great. Now, I've got some buttons here, which you can keep on. They don't really show in my Geotab, but they're not really necessary either. I tend to hide them, and this is just me being picky. You don't have to do this. I'm just going to right-click on one of these buttons, and I'm going to hide all of the buttons on the chart. Great. Okay, so now I've got my 5 vehicles, I've got my idle duration, and I've got a chart title and a legend. So the legend isn't really needed because it's just saying total. We all know what we're looking at, and we can really, instead of defining it in the legend, we can define it with the axis titles. So I just clicked on the total and hit delete on my keyboard, and it's gone. We also don't even really need the chart title, because if you look back into the database on the dashboard, we name the reports in my Geotab, so it has its own title. So if you have a title here and then a title on the chart itself, just a little redundant, we don't really need it. So I'm going to click on total, and I'm going to delete that as well. So now I have more room for the chart. So from here, this is where options may look a little bit different. I think you would go into your format or your design, and you could actually set up your axis and all those things. I have a little plus button here, which is probably one of the best new features of Excel. Make it really, really easy for me. So if I click on this button, I can click on Axis Titles, and I now have titles that I can change. So I'll just call the bottom one here Vehicle. And you can, I don't know if you can see, but it's actually changing it up in the formula bar here. If I hit Enter, it changes it over there. I'm going to click on this one and call this idle duration and hit Enter, and now we've got it. So now we can easily see what we're looking at. Now from here you can get a little bit more, you can do some more customization. I can add some data labels if I want, and I can choose where they lie on the chart. Maybe I want them on the outside end. So instead of trying to, visually go across and see where it falls in place, I can see them at the end of their bar. Just make them a little bit smaller. Easy peasy. Okay, so now we've got our chart, we've got our table, it's top 5, perfect. I could sort this so that it's highest to lowest, or I can keep it the way it is. If I wanted to sort it highest to lowest, it's just as simple as going back over to that drop down under the name and sorting, and I would just do sort more sort options, sorry, because if I just do sort A to Z or Z to A, it's actually doing it by the name of the vehicle and not by the value of the idle duration. If I want to sort it by the value, I need to go into more sort options. So I'm going to sort it highest to lowest, descending, and I don't want to sort it by the name, I want to sort it by the idle duration. Click OK, and you can see I've now have it sorted in the chart as well as the table. All right, now here's where I start to get a little bit nitpicky. What I tend to do is I hide this field list, because there's some people that maybe when they open the report they see this, they're like, what the heck is that? I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this report. They don't really need to do anything with it. This is more for us when we're creating it. You can just hide it or close it. So there's a little X. I don't know if you can see where my mouse is over here. I can click on the X and it's gone. So if I click on this pivot table, it just looks like a regular table of data. No weird field list over there. Same thing if I click on the chart, I don't see that either. Okay, so when we look at the chart, there are some standard sizes that the charts are in the My Geotab system. So the standard would be about 3 inches by 3 inches would be a normal tile, if you will. So if I look over here, this watchdog report, activity summary, all these little ones here are the standard 3 by 3. And then this top 5 speeding is actually doubling it, so it's a 3 by 6. So I can actually cover different sizes, which is really nice. So I can have a really big one if I wanted to. The smallest I can go would be to one of these tiles like the watchdog report. So I'm just going to actually right-click anywhere on an open white space on the chart. If I right-click on the idle duration or any element within the chart itself, it's not going to give me what I want from the list. I actually want to click maybe down in the corner, and I want to format the chart area. So this may come up in a separate window for some people with older versions of Excel. For me, it just pops up over here on the right. I'm just going to actually click on border, and I'm just going to take the border off because we already have a border around the charts in the actual database itself. We don't need to throw in another one. And yes, that is me being picky. You don't have to do that. Okay, so the size is where we want to go. So I'm going over to the size. You can see I've got my height already at 3 inches. I could change it to be 3 inches there as well. And it's pretty crammed. So instead, maybe I wanted to expand to cover 2 tiles on the dashboard. I could then change the width to be 6. And then now it looks a little bit cleaner, it's easier to read, it's not as squished together, which is nice. The other thing I like to do, and I do definitely recommend doing this, is going into the properties and changing what the default is. So the default is move and size with cells. So what that means is by default, for some reason, we're looking at a top 5 here. The size of the pivot table isn't really going to change because it's only going to have 5 in there. But if you didn't have top 5 and you had data constantly changing and that pivot table were to expand to be a little bit bigger, the current setting that it's at right now will make the chart actually expand with that data. So I don't want the chart to change its size. So I'm okay if it has to move to the right, you know, if there's more columns being added to the pivot table, that's fine. But I don't want to change the size. I want to keep it at that 3 by 6. So I always recommend to do this second option, which is move, but don't size with the cells. And that's pretty much all I need for the options there, so I'm just going to go ahead and close that. And now we've got our chart, we've got our table, looks pretty good to me. Now, we're not done yet. Before I actually save it, I want to clean the template. So what I'm going to do, and what that means is I want to actually go over to the Data tab. Now, we don't necessarily need to do it with this one, and I did say there's certain things that you can do in the Data tab that won't break the report, and one of those is deleting lines of data. So because I say build a report with live data, you could, when you have built it, you could have had hundreds and hundreds of vehicles in there. We don't recommend that you keep those hundreds and hundreds of lines of data when you're creating this as a template, because it's just too big for it to kind of process. So when a report actually runs, it'll go through all the existing lines of data in the report and delete them, and then it will go back up to the top and it would fill them in with the new pieces of data. So if there's already 100 lines of data in the report, it just helps with the processing time, if you will. So I usually recommend to keep, you know, about two lines of data in there. So I'm going to do that right now, and I'm just going to actually click on row 11. Little tip here is you can actually click on Shift Control and hit the down arrow, and that will bring you to the end of the data, no matter how long it is, instead of clicking and dragging and sitting there, because I know I've done that in the past, and dragging and just trying to get to the end of the data. So Shift Control down will take you to the end. Right click, and I want to delete. I don't want to clear. I want to delete those rows so it's nice and clean. The other thing I want to do is I want to actually what I refer to as templatizing the report. So I want to actually change the names of the vehicles. It's okay that I change names because, like I said, when it runs, it's going to delete all that information anyway. But when you put this into the customer's database, it could be a new customer's database, if they ever go into the report section of the software and download the template, we don't want proprietary information from other fleets in there. So I usually just change this to say vehicle 1, vehicle 2, nice and easy. And then I'll change the, well, company name is Geotab, which is fine, but if it was a customer's name, you could just do something like fleet name. So once again, that's all going to be deleted and filled in, so there's no need to worry you're not breaking the report. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hide the Data tab again because I don't want people to kind of play around with it. Now you can see we do have some errors here, and that's okay. Those errors are reference errors. So basically it's saying that the data that it was referring to on the Data tab no longer exists. There's nothing for it to reference anymore, which is fine because we deleted those rows. So I want to do the same thing on the Report tab. I'm going to highlight row 11. I'm going to do Shift Control down, and I'm going to right click and I'm going to delete. And that's okay. And I can validate these changes, make sure that the all data named range is still working okay by clicking up in the left corner here, clicking on all data, and it's still highlighting all my data, which is great. So now we're ready to save the report. And as you can see, the pivot table still holding on to that old information. That's perfectly fine. I'm just going to actually click on Save, and I'm going to close the report. Okay, so now back in the database, I want to throw this into the database. This is my new awesome custom report. I want to see what it looks like on the dashboard. So to do that, I'm going to go to Administration, Reports, and I have three options here. I've got Report Views, Dashboard, and Emailed Reports. And really what these are, it's just different list views of the reports that are in the database. So if I want to view all the reports that are turned on as dashboards, I could click on Dashboard. If I want to view all the ones that are emailed reports, I could click on Emailed Reports. And then if I want to view all the ones that are turned on to be viewed in that section of the software, which is the report views, I can do that as well. Since I'm just simply importing, I'm just going to click on report views because it doesn't really matter which one I choose. And I'm going to click on Add Excel File. Now you can see we've got this box here that says drag and drop your files here, or click and choose them. So I can actually take my folder here and I can drag and drop. Drag and drop, you can see there. Or I can click on it and it'll open up my folder and I can open from there. So now it's actually imported it into the system, and now I'm into the options screen. I can change the name of the report by clicking on the title that I already have. So I can say top 5 idling last week because I want to know what time frame I'm looking at. And now I can choose to have this report show in the drop-down. So you know when I was in trip summary, and I'll actually just show you what I mean. Just open that in a new tab. When I was in trip summary and I click on view, I've got a whole bunch of reports here. That's the report view. Okay, so I can choose to have that report show in that list or not. There could be times that you create a report that should only be set for emailed reports. Nobody else should really see it when they go into that area of the software, so you can turn it, keep it off or on. I'm just going to keep it off for now because I really just want to show you. Actually, I'll turn it on, so I'll show you what it looks like. You can see when I turn it on, I've got a few options here. I can run the report by device or by driver, depending if you're using driver ID. I can group, which is that trending, daily, weekly, monthly. And then I can run the report by individual vehicles or drivers, or just one line for company group, or break it down by groups as well. Because I'm looking at top 5, I do want to keep the individuals in there. Okay, so if I go over to dashboard now, I can turn it on as a dashboard. So by default, it's turned off. I turn on, and I have the option to display on my dashboard only for now. So I always recommend to do this when you're creating a report, a custom report that you're just still testing. You want to make sure it looks good before you really publish it to everybody else. I always recommend to do on for here, and you can see it says only one user will see this graphic. When it comes time for you to actually turn it on for the rest of the organization, then you can choose the viewers. You can choose the group, could be everybody in the company, or maybe only a specific group of users that should view it. Okay, so I'm going to choose my date range. I know this is a weekly report, so I'm going to choose last week, and I want it to refresh weekly. And the next run date, it's going to be right now, but what I can do is I can actually say I want it to run the next time on a Monday. So I want it to be Monday, and I want it to be, let's say, 5 a.m. because I want it to be there loaded when I get into the database. So now what's going to happen, because I've chosen that, is it's going to run every single Monday for the previous week at 5 a.m. Now the belonging to section is really the vehicles. So what vehicles do I want included in this report? For this report, I want all vehicles, so that's everything. You can narrow it down to be a specific location or region or vehicle type, depending on the report that you're creating. For this one, I'll keep it at everything, and I'm going to keep the same options that we saw in the report view as well. Okay, so now that I've got all my settings there, I'm going to click on Save. It's now in my list, and I'm going to go over to the dashboard, and it's going to be there at the bottom. And there we go. So we've got top 5 idling last week. Perfect. It looks like a nice fit. I can see it really well. But maybe I want to actually edit this report. Maybe I don't like the color of the graph. So what I can do to edit the report is, instead of actually clicking on this, so I can click on this and it will open up the Excel file, but it will open up the file with all of the data for last week. Really what I want to do is just edit the template. I don't want to have to download this, save it, and then re-import it back into the system. So because I did save my report on my computer, I can actually just edit that existing report and pop it into the database. So I'll show you a couple of ways that you can really do this. So now that it's on the dashboard, if I click on Reports and go to Dashboard, I've got a list of all the ones that are on as a dashboard. Now you don't actually see all of these because I've hidden some of them from my view, but you can see they're broken down by the area of the software that they were created from. So if I were to go down to Trip Summary, I've got my top 5 idling last week. It's on for last week and it's running weekly. Now I can click on this Excel button and that will export the file and allow me to save it on my computer. That is only if I didn't already have it saved on my computer. Maybe it's a new user that's making this edit and they don't have it anywhere on their computer. You can export it, save it on your computer, make your changes, and then pop it back in. So I'll show you what that means. Let's just pretend I didn't already have it on my computer. I'm going to click on that button. I'm going to open it in here. Now it's throwing some numbers on there. That's perfectly fine. I'm just going to save it. I'm going to open the report, enable my editing. Okay, and you can see my template only has those two vehicles, which is fine. And then I can change the color of the chart. So I'm going to change the fill. Maybe I want it to be green because we're talking about idle, green, fuel, all that good stuff. And I'm just going to click on Save. Simple as that. I'm going to click on Save, close it, and you can see that back in the database, it's actually brought me back into that edit screen automatically because it knows that I was exporting the report, so I probably either want to make some changes to it or import it back into the system. So, and it's right, I did make some changes. I do want to throw it back in there, so I can drag and drop or I can click. So I'm just going to click. I'm going to choose that file that I just made the edits to. Click on Open, and you can see here that it's zipped it, it's now in the system, and it's overriding the existing report that was in there. So that existing report that was there is gone now. This one is replacing it. So I'm going to click on Save. I'm going to go back to my dashboard, and I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, and I now have my report, and it's green, which is just what I wanted. So I know we've got about 5 minutes left. We're cutting it a little bit short. Was there any questions about anything that I just did there? I know I kind of sped it up at the end there just because we were running out of time.
I think we're pretty good. I have a question. Is there a way to get each bar a different color?
Not really. I mean, I'd have to understand the use case of why you would really want to do that. Maybe each vehicle have its own color. Really, there's ways that you can kind of play around with the pivot table. You can move the vehicle into columns, and I'll show you what I mean actually if I open up the report again. This is the existing one that was blue. You could, let me just show that pivot table, oh, sorry, the field list. You can see here I've got filters, columns, rows, and values. Right now the name is in rows. Maybe it was a group that I wanted to add in there. And you can see it's got vehicle 1, entire organization, vehicle 2, entire organization. I could move the group into the columns and bring my legend back. If I had different group names, and I can kind of fudge this as well as just for the sake of showing you. The different group names will have their own color because they're their own column. Hope that answers the question, but as far as it goes to the name or the rows, they're all going to be one color. I just wanted to actually point out I did kind of lightly touch on the languages tab that was hidden. This is a new feature that we actually just implemented in our November software release, and it's basically you can now translate any of our our default reports into different languages. So I'll just show you quickly. Let me just unhide that languages tab. So we have a translation table in the report. So you can see we've got different columns for different languages. We've got quite a few languages in here, which is nice. We've got English, French, Spanish, German, and Japanese. Very cool stuff. Basically, and let me just show you a template, and I know we have only a couple minutes left. Let me just open up one of our built-in reports. These are all custom ones that we've got here. Here's our built-in ones. So if I were to maybe just export the congregation report as an example, you can see that all of the headers have those asterisks in front of them, and the reason being is for the translations. Let me just unhide that languages tab again. So you can see English, it's got those asterisks in front of it, and then these are all the different languages for that word. So no need to worry about the asterisks as far as the template goes, because when the report actually runs, it actually will take out those asterisks and it'll just be the regular wording. So, and it's based on your user options. So if you're a user in, I don't know, Latin America, you want to see things in Spanish, then your user options in my Geotab are set to see things in Spanish. When you actually run any one of these default reports now, it's going to automatically be translated into your language that you've chosen for your user. So it is user specific, but I wanted to point that out because when you are creating a custom report, if you do want it to be translated, you will need to put asterisks back in front of them. Because I did run this as a live report, it was already translated to English, if you will, so it took out those asterisks. So if you do want this to run for a different language, it's just as simple as throwing 2 asterisks in front of your headers. Same thing with all of these headers here, even the name up there, and it will automatically translate your new custom report based on the user settings.
All right, excellent. We do have a question here as to languages that are coming. We have about 12 languages that are in process at different levels at the moment. So currently we have those 5 that you saw. We have some other ones that are, as I said, in process at the moment. They're not released yet. In our install guide, we have 6 languages. We're within the next year, we'll probably have 12 up there. So we're always growing with that, just to kind of answer those questions. In any event, it is 2:01, so I want to say thank you so much for coming. Have a wonderful holiday season. Merry Christmas to everyone, and we will see you in the new year. We will be coming back with hours of service and all of the buzz that's happening with that. We'll get into some advanced reports and some other wonderful things happening. So we will see you in the new year. Thanks so much.